Ever wonder which method to use to start your seeds? Should you only use one method? Which method is best to use for which seed type? And which is my favorite method to start seeds? We'll cover all that here. So welcome to Part-Time Permies. I'm Cindy. Now, one pretty simple method for starting seeds that you could do inside before it gets warm enough to plant outdoors is the paper towel and baggy method. The nice thing about this method is it's really easy to start in very limited space. I started it with my daughter. It kept her interest the whole time. You can tell exactly which seeds germinated when they start this way. And you don't waste soil in planting seeds into soil blocks or containers that didn't ever germinate. One thing you do have to keep in mind with this method is you have to transplant these seeds as soon as they start germinating. So this does end up being a two-step process. So that could take a little bit more time, but definitely does help you with space in the initial steps. You do have to watch these seeds daily because they will germinate very quickly if you leave them too long, or some seeds may be just prone to mold. So you do have to watch how your seed and your seedlings are doing and get them moved over to soil pretty quickly as soon as they start emerging. I do think this method is pretty good for the smaller seed plants. Brassicas work well this way. Your alliums or your onions and leeks and shallots and stuff work well this way. And even your lettuces, you can start this way pretty darn easily. What I found for larger seeds, I did try spinach and I tried chard as well. Those actually molded a little bit more and didn't quite do as well. You can let me know if you tried this method for other seeds that worked well for you. Down in the comments, that'd be awesome. This was actually my first year doing this method, and I do like it because it's really quick to get things started, but I did find it challenging to keep up with the emergence of those seedlings and getting them up potted into soil. I think next year I'll primarily use this method for my alliums, and I'll try starting them earlier than I did this year because really you could start these around Christmas to New Year's, beginning of the year, because they take so long to grow from seed. I think I will keep going with this method, but not for quite as many seeds as I did this year. Now, one issue with getting behind on the paper towel method is you get things a little overcrowded. And what I did, instead of separate them and up pot them, I actually just ended up putting them in soil on their paper towels because paper towel will break down, and let them continue to grow. So I already pulled out some that were in this section. I'm working on planting these, which are mustard greens, interplanting with my asparagus bed. I didn't have the time or space to keep up with the up potting, so we're untangling them now and putting them straight into the ground. Another method to start your seeds is direct sowing. And this is definitely a very easy method to start your seeds. And you can do this for your warmer crops. You have to wait for the last frost, but for your cold season crops, you can do it before your last frost, which is actually kind of nice. It's basically a one-step method for getting your seeds into the ground and started growing. You have to keep your seedlings ahead of your weeds so that you don't get overrun with weeds, and that can be a challenge as things get warmer. This method is very kid-friendly. In fact, we do this with Bella in her raised bed garden, and she can plant those seeds directly herself or scatter them as needed. It's actually really good for either your cold hardy plants. You could do this with your brassicas, your lettuces, root vegetables. It's also good for your fast growing plants. So you can grow things like early season cucumbers by direct sowing them. You don't have to start those ahead of time. Or, some of your lettuces are really quick growing too, so you can section grow them outside by direct seeding. Some of the disadvantages of this is that if you have a short growing season, it's hard to get enough time to get things to germinate and grow to harvestable periods in your growing seasons. You also have less control on the environment with this one. So if you need warmth to germinate your plants, but they're otherwise cold hardy, that makes it a little bit harder to start them outdoors. So some of your brassicas are that way. They're easier to start indoors than move outdoors. unless you're going to start a midsummer for fall harvest, which is another option. The other thing these plants are susceptible to is critter damage. So if you have rabbits or voles or moles or different animals who want to eat tasty little plants, then that does make it a bit harder to get things established unless you have really good critter control. One advantage you have with this method of seeding that is a disadvantage with most other methods is you don't have to worry about transplant shock. If you're direct sowing into the ground, the seedlings are acclimated to that spot from the get-go. You don't have to worry about when you transplant having root damage when you're transplanting or shock to the different environment from inside to outside. So you don't run into that with direct seeding, which is actually pretty nice. Another method to start your seedlings is in containers, pots or modules or something like that, which is pretty easy. I mean, you have your soil starting mix. A lot of people will buy a soil starting mix and just put them into pots and containers and then put your seeds directly into those. There are some advantages there. I like to use this again with the longer season plants that you can't exactly direct sow because you don't have a long enough season. You need to start them ahead of time, but are pretty kid-friendly things. So I will use this method for my daughter to encourage her to help start plants. What I don't like about this method is that you could get plants that are root bound if you don't get them outside quick enough, or it could be a little tough to get them out of those containers as you're trying to get them into the ground. Sometimes the soil falls apart on you, or like I said, if it's root bound, then it's holding together, but your roots are going to get some shock as you go into the soil. The other thing with starting in pots, you definitely need a lot more space and soil to use for those seedlings, and a whole setup, shelving, lights, or a greenhouse to set those up and have enough space to, if you want a lot of plants. The other disadvantage is you do need to harden those seedlings off. So if they're coming from a warm indoor or a greenhouse environment, you're wanting to get them into the garden, you do need to shift them out into that environment a little bit ahead of time to get them used to that outdoor environment before putting them in the ground, to reduce a little bit of the transplant shock. But oftentimes you'll still get a bit of transplant shock when moving these outside because you're disturbing their root systems as you're shifting them into the ground, and you're just changing their overall environment. And just to shift topics for a moment, I did want to let you know that I found a really kind of super detailed seed starting application web app. It helps you determine when you could plant your seeds, when you start them inside, when to direct sow them, when to transplant them, when to get your beds ready for transplant or direct sowing, and when to harvest these. And it kind of maps out the whole season in a calendar depending on seed type. It also has a task list, so you can look week by week. You can even put notes in there and keep it as a garden journal, which is kind of cool too. So you can make notes for next year on how you might want to adjust your calendar. It's called Seed Time at seedtime.us. I will put a link for that in a pinned comment below. They definitely have a free version that is pretty darn comprehensive. Now, if there's some seed that they're missing, they have most of the ones in Johnny Seeds, but if they're missing a seed, you can't do customizable ones. You might be able to do some general ones and kind of figure it out, but there is a paid version where you can do more customization and garden bed planning and all of that. I've tried out the free version, which just does the calendars and the tasks and stuff for the common seeds, and it has been really thorough. It'll even set up succession planting for you, or planting for summer harvest versus fall harvest, and when to start those different seeds. I do have an affiliate link, which I will place in a pinned comment below. Obviously, do not get anything if you're going for the free version, but if you're looking for more than that, then I do get a small commission if you purchase a paid version. But check that out below. It is kind of a really cool app. Just excited to see someone putting together an app like this. The last method for starting seeds that I'm going to go over in this video is with soil blocks. Now, soil blocks have been one of my favorite ways to start seeds, especially the long season seeds. It has some definite advantages over container planting. Soil blocks do take a little more time to get them set up to start your seeds. However, they do save a lot of time in your transplanting. They're very easy to transplant. You just pick up a block and put it in the ground. There's less transplant shock with soil blocking because those roots in that soil block do not get root bound. They stop growing when they hit air. So that's called air pruning. Another advantage to this is, yes, we have plastic seed trays that we use, which, by the way, I use from Bootstrap Farmer, another great resource. But you get some really strong seed trays. They'll last for years. So I'll put the link to the one I use below, but you don't have to use any plastic containers. So with that, you have an advantage of less plastic, less garbage if things start breaking on you. It's definitely more sustainable in that way. I did experiment this year with a peat-free recipe for soil blocks and have found that that's actually worked pretty darn well, and it's more sustainable. The disadvantages to using soil blocks for your seed starting is that they do take up a little more space in your either greenhouse or your indoor setup. You need the shelving, you need the lighting, you need the right temperature for starting seeds. So you still need all that setup there that you would need for, potted plants. But you have the advantage of less plastic, and actually you can fit more soil blocks per tray than you can a plastic container. So you're actually using the space more efficiently as well. The only other disadvantage if you're starting your seeds directly in your soil blocks is that if they don't germinate, you waste a little bit of soil. Technically, I don't really consider that much of a waste because any extra soil there, I'm pretty much bringing out to the garden and putting it in my garden. So it is adding nutrients to my garden, even if it didn't have a plant in the soil. What are my favorite methods for seed starting? Well, it kind of depends on the seed. For some of them, I do like to go and direct seed them, things like carrots and a lot of your root vegetables, you just put straight in the ground outside. Some of my flowers, I do that way as well, so I don't have to worry about taking space indoors for things I generally don't eat or don't eat as much. For your longer season plants, I definitely prefer soil blocks. I might continue to use the paper towel method for germinating some seeds, especially the alliums. And then you can pretty easily transplant those into soil blocks as you need to pot them up. Although I will say all these methods have their uses and times to use them. Let me know what your favorite methods are below, or if you have any other methods that you like to use that we didn't talk about today, feel free to share that. I'll put a link to the new soil block recipe video here, and we'll see you with our next videos.